Welcome to Payroll Setup lesson number 12 on setting up pay rates. As you can see, I have clicked into the Pay Rates tab on my main Payroll Center screen. And I have pay rates already set up, but we're going to talk about how you set them up and what the difference is between union ones and non-union ones, hourly, salary, all of that kind of thing. So as you look at this, you can see I have many different types of pay rates set up. Some of these are union ones, and I can tell because those are related to their own specific union codes. Some of them are non-union. I have both salary and hourly pay rates in here. I've got vacation pay rates. So some of these pay rates are going to be used for accruing time off, if that's one of the things that we want to do. We'll talk about that. And some of these are not used for accruing time off. So all of this can be accomplished down here at the bottom of the screen as we set up pay rates. When you click the New button, that will clear the bottom part of the screen and allow you to enter a new pay rate. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on an existing one and go through the fields as if I was setting up a new pay rate. I'm brought down to the active checkbox, which you want on if this pay rate is indeed an active one. You can always take the check mark out if this pay rate ever becomes inactive. As I press enter, I'm brought down to the description, and this is the description of the pay rate. Now in the case of union, it's going to be very important to have different pay rates for each different union code that you have already set up. So in this case, this is for my local 110 foreman pay rate. As I press enter, then I can do a short name for that pay rate in the S name field. As I press enter, I'm brought down to the salary field, and because most of my pay rates will not be salary, they will rather be hourly, I'm going to leave the salary at 0 for this particular pay rate because I'm going to use the hourly rates at the right side of the screen here. Now when we talk about the difference between hourly and salary, really the only difference is that you're going to use the salary field rather than the hourly rates if indeed the pay rate is a salary pay rate, as in the case of my office salary pay rate. So the salary that you would put in on a salaried pay rate is what that total amount of salary represents for each pay period. Okay, so if this is going to be a weekly pay rate for a salaried individual, then this can represent the default salary for the whole week because it's calculated on a week-to-week basis. Okay. Also, the hours per unit is also represented based on how frequently the pay rate is going to be used. In other words, are they paid on a weekly basis? Then this would usually represent 40 units of pay or 40 hours per unit. If the pay rate is based on biweekly, then this would be hours per unit of 80. So the hours per unit is really based on the frequency of pay, weekly being the most common. Now let me double click back on my hourly one because that's really the only difference between hourly and salary is how you use these two fields. Okay, on an individual hourly basis, then the units per hour is always 1. There's always a one-to-one relationship between the units of pay and how many hours. Okay, just think of them the same in that case. Now as I press enter and I go down to the Accrue Time Off checkbox, if you want to down the road set up time off accruing, then you can tell the Cobra which are your pay rates that are going to be accruing time off. Now as you know, with time off there's two sides to it, the accruing side and then the reduction side, like when they're paid for vacation or paid for holiday or sick time or whatever. So by clicking a check mark into the accrue time off, that means that you do want to have Cobra accrue the time off anytime they're paid by this pay rate. Now keep in mind that the accruing side can also be handled manually. So many of our customers like to just add so many hours per year to an individual after they've been there so long, and they don't want COBRA to be accruing time off on a, say, weekly or monthly basis. So you only want to have a check mark in here if you want COBRA to actually do the accruing of the time off. Now this new checkbox was added, and I'm not sure why anybody would not want to show the wage on the check stub, but you have the option not to do that. I suppose on some pay rates you may want to hide that on the check stub, but I can't off the top of my head think of any reason why you'd want to do that. But I'm sure that people have requested that, so that's why that's there. As I press enter, I'm brought down to the pay type drop down. So let's take a look at what's in there. Now obviously most of your pay rates are going to be taxable pay, so that's why that's at the top of the list, so you don't have to go scroll hunting for it or any of that. But you may also have pay rates for things like reimbursements or any non-taxable pay, so you do have those pay types in here as well. So by selecting those, COBRA will know how to treat those in terms of how to calculate tax against these pay rates. Non-tax or taxable time off and non-taxable time off, that tells COBRA that you don't want it to be accruing any time off against this pay rate. So for example, a vacation pay rate, not only would you say you not have the accrued time off not checked, but you would also select, say, taxable time off instead of taxable pay for, say, vacation or sick time or comp time pay rates. Just like with everything in the payroll, you need to relate your pay rate to the general ledger account. And so let's talk about this a little bit. With the active field workers who are being paid for their active time in the field, on those particular pay rates you may want to relate their the pay rate to a cost of goods sold account in the general ledger. So hopefully you've seen all that general ledger set up and all that, and you have some cost of goods sold accounts set up in your general ledger for your active labor. So whenever they go out and actually do physical work for on behalf of the company, that's when you would want to relate the pay rate to a cost of goods sold account. Otherwise, if the payroll pay rate that you're setting up is really for office salaries or non-field workers, you can relate this pay rate for those items to more expense accounts in the general ledger. As I hit enter, I'm brought down to the W-2 box. So this tells COBRA which W-2 box you want the pay rates, dollar amounts to be collected into, if I can say it that way. Otherwise, if you have other pay rates that you're setting up, as I mentioned before, you might have mileage, you might have reimbursement, you might have tools that you're reimbursing them for, or any of that. You may not want to show the calculations for those pay rates to be shown up on the W-2 or reported on the W-2. So you can select that option in the W-2 box list. But since wages is most often used on pay rates, that's the one we're going to select here. Now the frequency, simply how often do you run payroll? Because the frequency tells the tax tables how to calculate the taxes based on how frequently they're paid. So it's very important that we get that set right up front now, because if we forget to set that right now and we change it later on and you've already got payrolls in progress, although you can resave all of your time card entry and stuff like that, it's best to handle that right now. Now union code. Obviously if you're non-union you don't worry about it, just press enter through it. But again, because this pay rate has a one-to-one relationship with union codes, you do want to relate your union code, excuse me, to your pay rate by selecting it from the union code drop-down. When I press enter, then I'm brought down to the hourly rates. So if this is for field workers who are working out in the field and they're not paid on a salary basis, as indicated by over here, we want to make sure that we check this use hourly box on, and then as we hit enter, we can enter the straight time, the overtime, and the double time rates, which are automatically calculated for you anyway based on the straight time for this particular pay rate. Okay, so then you'll see later on, as we get into time card entry way down the road here, after all the payroll setup is done, that when you select that you're paying them for straight time hours, it will pick this rate. If you're paying for overtime hours, it will pick this rate, and double time will pick this rate. Okay. Now keep in mind that any of this can be customized on the employee level. So this can be a default, this can be a starting wage for the pay rate. So just keep that in mind. Any of these can be customized on the employee side. So when I hit enter, it asks me, do I want to save the pay rate? Well, I'm just going to press enter on the yes, because I do want it saved. And once it is saved, it will be entered into this list above. And then at this point, I can take the next step of relating deductions, benefits, taxes, etc. to the pay rate itself. So once it's displayed above, I want to double click on it so it's showing down below in the entry fields. But what we're going to do is we're going to work in these tabs to the right of the general tab to relate especially union stuff together with this pay rate. Workman's comp codes, same kind of thing, because workman's comp code, union benefits, and union deductions are all based on the pay rate that they're going to be calculated against. So when I go into the deductions tab, you can see that for my 110 foreman, I have already related the payroll deductions for that union code directly to the pay rate. And I did so by just putting check marks in the related deductions, and I click the add button to get them over on the right side of the screen. So what you see at the right then are the deductions directly related to this pay rate that we're setting up. Same thing in deductions if you have that one-to-one relationship between your benefits, I should say, and the pay rate itself. Although again, keep in mind that we normally want union benefits set up in the ER liabilities tab, and we're working our way over there here. Taxes too. If this is a taxable pay rate, you want to tell it what taxes you want calculated against that pay rate by checking them on the left, clicking add so that they appear at the right. Now there may be some times where you might have a pay rate that you don't want taxes calculated against. Now if it's a taxable pay rate but you don't want, say, state tax calculated against it, you could actually remove it from the right side of the screen there. So essentially what we're saying here is at the right side of the screen, these are all the taxes that are going to be calculated against this particular pay rate. Now don't worry about that for non-taxable pay rates, because even if you do put something on the right side of the screen, Cobra is smart enough to know that it's a non-taxable pay rate because of what you selected down here, and it will not calculate tax anyway. Now let's talk about liabilities, which includes union benefits, right? What we want to do is check all of the liabilities in this long list of them, especially if you're union, it'll be a long list, and add them to the right side of the screen. And that's what we did here earlier. So in this case, I have not only my normal tax liability showing up at the right, but I also have my union benefits that are related directly to this pay rate attached directly to it. So that's what we meant earlier when we were setting up the deductions and the liabilities, where we said must attach to pay rate means that they're very pay rate specific. They will only be calculated against the pay rate that they're directly attached to. Okay? So that ends the lesson on setting up pay rates.